Hello, can anybody hear me? Hello, can anybody hear me? Hi, everyone. Um, Good evening. My name is Mortaro Sadiq, and we will be going through. I welcome everybody to the web development program, the African Bootcamp today. And with me here, I have one of our facilitator, David, and we're going to be taking us through the program together. And basically, what we have to do is to understand what we what we know as web development, and we're going to be taking us through the basic understanding, all everything we need to understand on how to become a web developer. So ranging from understanding the HTML, CSS, and the backend technology we are going to be using, and JavaScript, and also we are going to be using that from the front end too. And Mr. David, if you are here, you can signify. So now, I will show us what we need to. We have a curriculum design for us. Okay. So let me share my screen. Okay, I'm trying to share my screen to walk us through the curriculum we're going to be using for the program. All right, so I said JavaScript for front end and also JavaScript for the back end. Okay, so my screen is live, and here is the curriculum we're going to be using as a guideline for the program. All right, so for the first week of the program, which we have right now, we're going to be talking about the introduction to web development and sharing the understanding on web and its components using HTML, CSS, understanding the basic of web development tools, the code editors, and getting us familiar with the browsers, how the browser understand the language, translate the code, and display it on the browser. It's called that process is called a rendering. And also we understand the web structures and the layouts. Also, for the second week, we're going to be talking about HTML and CSS, where this week is going to be a very hand-on project. I believe every one of us should be ready to get our hands dirty, to code throughout this week, because we are going to be working on HTML and CSS extensively. Understanding the HTML styling. All right, can I zoom in? Okay, I hope this is right. Can everybody see my screen very well? Yeah, so now we're going to be talking about the HTML, CSS, and the layouts. After that, we move on to responsive design. What do we understand by responsive design? Is the process whereby you design a system that can work perfectly on the web, on the web browser, the screen on the laptop, ranging from the laptop screen to mobile view, and also to a tab screen. After that, we move on to the JavaScript, understanding how JavaScript works and understanding the basic functionalities of JavaScript, understanding the control structures, the functional part of the programming of the JavaScript, understanding how the JavaScript variables and data type we have. Then we move on to the DOM manipulation. What is DOM manipulation? DOM manipulation is the process of modifying modifying the objects on the web browser on our screen, whereby you can write the JavaScript code to update or change the component on a specific button or picture rendering and all sorts of things like that. Then the event handling. Yeah, sure. We're going to provide the, the contents for the course. So we move on to DOM manipulation. Okay, we move on to event handling. What do we understand by event handling? So every operation we perform on the web, on the front end of the engine we're interacting with, everything is revolve around events. And as JavaScript it's kind of like event system. So on the front end engine, we're going to be walking ourselves through some eventing operation like on click, on over, on all sort of event like that. Then we move on to the basic algorithm and solving problem, which is one of the core thing as a web developer or a software engineer, which you actually need. You need the process of solving a problem, getting familiar with data structures and algorithm. And I believe we are going to talk extensively on that, and we are going to share some platforms with us where we are going to be working with data structures and algorithm. And also, we're going to move on to JavaScript intermediate and all. So basically, this is just the course content for the mentorship program. And we're going to provide this for us to have access to. And right now, I'll move on and invite the facilitator that will walk us through the introduction of the web development to come on board and share something with us. Thank you very much. All right.
The world of technology.
Can everybody see my screen? All right. So tonight we're going to have an introduction to web development, and based on what I discussed earlier. So what we understand by web itself, that's where we're going to start. A web is made up of a computer that are connected together in order to share and receive information. So whereby this is a process where we have a cloud provider, a server, and a client interacting together with each other. So you as a person, you serve, you're using this device, which is a client. So we understand that the client can be a laptop, a smartphone, or a desktop, or a tablet. So you make a request to a resource that is located and on the server. Now, the server is what we have. A server is a computer that provides service to another computer as a client over a local network or the internet. Any computer running a server or software can function as a server. So basically, what we understand by a server, it's basically a set of computers located in a place called data center. So this server is where the processes of or the projects you're running is located on, and whenever it is deployed to a world wide web, you can now access it. So you can access the resources you want from a client, which is a laptop, to the server. So now the server, you can now reach it via DNS server, domain name service. And also now, when I understand that the web server is a computer where the web content is stored, like I explained the other time, is stored on the server. But the content you save in the server is the web server that is running. So basically, a web server is used to the host to host the website. A website is a collection of web pages like a web portal and all. So a web server is a software that responds to the request of the resources. So for example, let me give an example. Let me set an example of Google. A Google is a website. Google.com is a website that you can access through the domain, the DNS called google.com. So the process of what you're running is stored on their data center. You want to access google.com from your phone, tablet, laptop, which is the client, from a web browser you are using on your phone. You can either be using Safari, you can use Google Chrome, you can use Microsoft Edge, you can use Firefox or Pramini from your phone to make request to the server. Now, the server will now return to you the web page you're looking for, which is google.com, that is serving directly from the server. Now, we now understand that, I said earlier that you can only reach the resource that is on the server through DNS, which is the domain name system, or an IP address. So an example of a domain name system is this, the incubator.org, or you have it as https://google.com. This right here is a domain name to the Google. Now, you can also reach it through the IP address. The IP can either be 192.233.222.444. So a specific IP address assigned to the domain name service. So you can make a request on your web browser using the domain name or using the IP address. So now we now come down to understanding of what is HTTP and HTTPS. So HTTP stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol, and the inverse is HTTPS, which is Hypertext Transfer Protocol over Secure Socket Layer. So what this simply means is that we have an HTTP and HTTPS. One is secure and the other one is not secure. Now, what's the difference? every one of us, if you are familiar with web browsing very well, you can understand that whenever you want to reach, you are browsing on your device, you make a request to a site that is not protected, where the HTTP, for example, this, let me give an example of HTTP over here, something like this. This right here is an HTTP request, while the HTTPS inverse is this. The difference here is that the HTTP and the HTTPS in the domain name. So this first one over here is not a secure URL, and the other one here is a secure URL. So now, what is now the difference between the two? The difference between the two is what we call an SSL, secure socket layer. So when you are deploying or you are setting up your web browser on the server, you have to provide an SSL to secure the the web you're deploying. So what we have here is that for a website to use HTTPS, it needs to have an SSL certificate installed on the server. So these are usually issued by trusted third party referred to as a certificate authority. So that would be the like a padlock to protect any request coming in to your service. And user that want to access your web portal, we have a trust in where any data they are sharing with your portal, with your web browser, data exchange on the portal is secure. So that's the basic understanding and the difference between HTTPS and HTTP. And also, we're moving on to the overview of client-side technology. What do we understand by client-side? Like I explained the other time, client basically is the user that wants to access a web server. And we as a person, we are the user trying to access what is running on the World Wide Web, which is the server. So now you can execute that with your web browser that will render the HTML and the CSS and the JavaScript you are trying to access. So now I have the HTML. What is HTML itself? Which is what will be the basic and the core thing we are going to be learning in this bootcamp for the first month. So HTML is an hypertext markup language. So what do we mean by that? It's just the terminologies for HTML. So now, HTML is what we use to write the code we write that will render on the web page. And you can use HTML to add image, videos, audios, tables, paragraph, and any kind of functionalities you want on a web page. So the HTML file is made up of tags, which needs to be translated by the browser. So what this simply means is that HTML itself is a tag. Everything on HTML is tag based. So let me give us an overview and example of what HTML itself means. So now the tag is what we have like this. Any project that you work on or any programming language you come across on your front end is all built with HTML underneath. So you have your HTML like this. You open the open tag, the closing tag, development, bootcamp. So this is what we display. Okay. Hold on. This is, we have the title like this. So, and we're going to have the body tag itself. So we can now have H1. Welcome to Incubator Bootcamp. So this is the basic HTML code that we are going to be working with. So this right here indicates that the web browser, we understand this and interpret it. This code we write here, we understand and interpret it um, to we understand the HTML code, and the browser will render it to display what we have as the title of Web Development Bootcamp and Welcome to Incubator Bootcamp. So this is a basic HTML code. Now, when we start writing our when we start our bootcamp, we are starting with projects. We are going to have more knowledge on what HTML is itself and a lot of tags we have on it, because everything we have right here, tables, for example, image, videos, they are all tag based. You need to interact with them with tags. So, for example, if I'm to give us an example of how to set up image on HTML, so we have an image tag, img, on HTML with this tag. So it's going to request for a source of where the image is coming from. The image might be located on a web browser. It can come in this way, like https slash google.com slash img slash hello.png. So this right here, when you load this code snippet on the web browser, is going to interpret this and display the image for us. All right, so that's just a basic understanding of what HTML is, because everything on HTML will be tag based. So we are going to be working with tags. So now we now move on to CSS. What is CSS? CSS simply stands for cascading style sheets. So it's a set of rules you need to define to style tags in your HTML file. Like I said, the tags over here. So you can use CSS to add color, background, add colors, background color, background images, and divide a web page into several sections. Now, what do we mean by that? So CSS is what we use to style the web page that we're designing. We had color, we had background, we give you some nice effects that we need. So CSS itself, it's a styling, is a scripting, is a script that we're going to be writing and inject into the HTML that we're writing. So now you can now communicate with CSS and HTML using two ways. You can communicate with HTML using the ID and the class. So you can target the HTML, the H1 over here with the style you can define from here. If you want to write a CSS, you open the script. So now we have two ways of injecting CSS into HTML. You can define your CSS as an inline script or define it as a separate file while you reference it in your HTML file header. So let me explain how we can do that. You can define an inline script over here in the header that goes as style. Okay. So now the header over here, the H1, let's assume we want to increase the font size. We can just call it as class header one. So over here, all you need to do is just reference it as a class base because we name it as a class by class header one and open the tag in front of it. So you can now give header one any type of customization we want. We want to increase the size. You can give it um 12. You want to give it a color. You can reference the color red and any type of configuration that we want. Okay. Okay, I was told to zoom in my computer. All right. So is it all right now? Okay, I can zoom in my computer. Can you guys see my screen very well now? Okay, I'm coming. All right, let's proceed. So, like I explained, you can reference the HTML tag you want to apply a CSS to using an ID like this. When you want to reference it in the HTML, in the CSS tag, you reference it with hash or class, which will be dot. So let's assume we have another tag over here, h4, that comes like this, hello world. Hello world. Then we have the ID of header 2. You can have it this way in your CSS style. You can reference it using the hashtag with the reference that you need for it. So the configuration you want is what you set over here. All right. So you can decrease this to maybe 7 and give this blue. So now this is what the HTML and CSS tags looks like. And when we start working very well, we start our class, we are going to have basic and in-depth knowledge on how this works perfectly. So now we're going to move on to what we understand by JavaScript. So JavaScript is used to add interactivity or behavior to web pages. JavaScript is often referred to the program language for the web browser. That means that JavaScript codes are executed on the browser, which is right. And JavaScript is used to create images, image slideshows, font validation, pop-ups, animation, and all sort of effects we want to add to the web browser. So what I can just explain to us as an overview with this JavaScript operation is that you can define a JavaScript script to perform an effect like they said over here, the slideshow. You can write list, you can add list of images to your web browser and write a script to create a slideshow, set the timers and how the position you want the image to move. You can customize all these using JavaScript. Also, the form validation. You can validate your form. Let us assume you are filling a registration form for this bootcamp. They require you to put in your first name, last name, address, phone number, and all. Validation can come in when you try to click submit button and unknowing you've omitted a text box that requires you to fill in your last name. The JavaScript will catch that error based on how you configure the validation to display the error through pop-up, or you can display the error under the text that you miss. So all this configuration is what we are going to be working with. JavaScript will allow you to manipulate your DOM objects. You've already rendered, the browser already rendered the HTML, but the JavaScript is what will give you the ability, the flexibility to perform an operation on the DOM, like putting the text form, the error text under the text box or above it. So that's what the JavaScript simply means. And also now, we now move on to the server-side technology. Throughout this bootcamp, we are going to be using JavaScript for our server-side. But what do we understand by server-side technology? Server-side technology that are executed on web server, such as PHP, Ruby, Python, Java, and C#. These are client-side, server-side program language that is basically used as a backend to integrate logic into your project, that handle the logic of your project, like you are submitting your form, the registration, your login, you are making a payment on your web portal, you're uploading a file, all sort of operation that is very, very logical, not the project. The service you're doing on the front end, like you're just imputing the data. Whenever you input the data, it's not going to the server side until it is being called or transferred to the server. And this now drive us to what we understand by the protocol that will transfer the data from the front end to the back end. What are the means? You can transfer the data from the front end to the back end using API, what we know as application programmable interface. So you can use API to transfer data from the front end to the back end. And we also have a process called gRPC. So it's we transfer data using buffer. It will buffer the data. So now, with the scope of this bootcamp, we will not be focusing on all these protocol. We have gRPC, we have sockets and all. So, but the focus of this class will be on the API. So, for example, I don't know, some of us might have come across the URL of how the API works. So later, when we get to the backend part of the bootcamp, we will explain more on that. So now, we now need to understand what frontend is itself. When you go to your web portal, maybe your Facebook, your Instagram, or your Gmail on your browser, that's the front end. Anything that is being displayed to you is understood by the front end, the client side. You can perform any operation on it. You can see image moving from one place to another. You can see effects, animation on your web page. You're streaming video. You generate a link. So all those things are the front end part of the system. So now there are tools that you can be using. So now the front end is being, you can interact with the front end using the JavaScript, HTML, and CSS. But with the advanced technology we have, some tools are out there that will make it very easier for us to build a very large web application. So now we can now leverage the tools like React.js, React.js, Angular, and Vue.js. So now, these three tools right here is the core part of the front end engine that anybody that is building a front end can use, and everything is being run using JavaScript. So now, but the bootcamp will focus on React.js. All right. So now we need to now move on to the backend. Like I think okay, we need to move on to the backend. So basically, the backend or the server side is the part of websites or software that user don't see. Like I explained earlier, you can't see that. You can only interact with the front end, but it's crucial functionality, which I mean by that is the logic, the brain behind anything you're working with. So it handles the server, the database, application logic, ensuring that everyone works smoothly behind the scene. So those are the the the, the backend is responsible for processing requests, managing data, and delivering information that the front end displays to user perfectly. Like I explained the other time, when you try to register on your web portal, or you try to log in your Facebook account, or you try to do anything, the moment you click on your login button or you click on registration button or forget password, the logic that will let you be able to achieve what you click on, what you're expecting, is the backend. And you can achieve this using the server side language that we listed up here. You can choose to use your backend language as PHP. You can use Ruby, you can use Python, Java, or C Sharp for your backend projects, because those those are the things that you can use. Now, as we said, it's process request from the front end. You are sending requests from the front end to the back end, passing data from it using a secure protocol. Like explained earlier, your system needs to be protected using HTTPS. The moment a user tries to log in on your portal, you are sending their credentials, their username and password over the network, and the network needs to be protected the same way the data you are sending from the front end to the back end need to be protected. I hope we are getting this, but don't worry, when we move forward in the class, we will understand this very well. All right, so now I explained IP address earlier, that instead of using every web running on the server has their own IP address. Like every server, independent server has their own IP address. And on a server, you can have multiple operation running on the server. For example, let's assume we have a single server right here with this IP address. We want to host our backend on this same server. We can also run our front end on this server. So now, what we now differentiate them, that's where ports comes in. We have a technology called ports, PORT. You can have your backend running on this IP address on ports 4000, while the front end can also be running on the same server on port 401. So instead of using the domain name service that we explained earlier, you can reach your backend using this IP address, the server IP, and the service you want to run using the ports. So this is an example of ports. You can have your ports like 4000, 3000, anything. And now the security now comes in. You can configure the server to you can whitelist ports that you want to accept on your server. So that's where we have the inbound and outbound. You can whitelist the request you want to accept through this port. Now let us assume we want to run 4001 on the portal on this server. We need to whitelist this 4041 because these are the trusted ports that we want the request to comes in. And we can also blacklist ports or IP address we don't want. Let us assume some fraudsters or scammers are trying to perform an illegal activity. They're trying to dump data or retrieve data from our system or trying to hack us. We can and we've identified that API request. We can whitelist or block that request on the server. You will list, okay, ports we don't want. You can blacklist the ports. Let us assume you've identified that, okay, the request is coming from 330.3301 like that, and the port address is 3000. You can block it. You can whitelist it. That, okay, any request that comes in from this request to, we don't want it. The server will not allow it to enter and pass through. All right. So I think right now this is where we are going to end the class and explanation for today. So we are going to continue on more tutorials on JavaScript, HTML, and CSS from the next class. And I really want us to come prepared for the class. We are going to provide the text on this documentation and this class so we can go out ourselves and make research to increase more knowledge ahead of the next class. Thank you very much. So if you have any question, you can send in the question and you can start answering and taking questions, which is something I would like from us. Okay, I'm going to the comments. Okay, what language are we using for backend? Good. We are going to be using JavaScript for the backend, and we're going to be using the Node.js for the server side. So, and for the front end, we are going to be using the React. Okay. All right. Okay, so you're asking for the specific resource center. Obviously, don't worry, we are going to provide a links and documentation for everybody to have access to. You can make more research on this. Can you use a phone for this project? No, you can't use a phone for the project. You have to be with a laptop because you need to set up and be able to write HTML and CSS on the laptop. But I don't know if you're comfortable using the phone. So when is our next class? We are going to be communicating that to us, but I believe we should have a next class tomorrow, the same time tomorrow. And we are going to be having 3 classes in a week. Um, Okay. Hmm. Okay, can we write our CSS separately and attach it to the HTML? Sure, sure. We can write our HTML separately in a file and reference it in the HTML. And you can also embed your HTML in the header tag of the, you can embed your CSS in the header tag of the HTML. Also, you can put your HTML inline to the HTML tag. So those are the three ways you can insert your HTML into the CSS. Yeah, obviously, I believe everybody here is a beginner or have more experience, but based on how we're starting the class, we are taking the class from as a beginner level. So everybody here can relearn and unlearn what we already know before. Mm, okay. So please, when can we get a timetable for the class? The timetable for the class will be provided. I believe it's the organizer of the program will get that across to everybody. Okay, so the IP address they show us is 401 and 4000. Is this something we will use every time? No, I understand. What I explained is an example of IP address and how it's being used. You can, on a specific server, you can have a lot of IP address, and on a specific server, you can have a lot of ports. So I just cite an example of 4000 and 401. On a server you're running, you can decide to be running on different ports. For example, if you are running a database, different database on your server. If you are running MySQL MongoDB database, MongoDB database has a configured ports to it, which is 27,000, right? And MySQL also has something like 3306 and but you can decide to configure it the way you want. You can the ports you can expose where the clients can communicate and the ports that can run in the server itself. So we have something we called open ports and closed ports, the ports that can be accessible and the port that is run inside the server. So okay, you are asking for the editor we are going to be using. So for the editor, we I would recommend you to start using VS Code. But if you're comfortable using any other editor like PyCharm and Hall, you can download it and get it set up. But VS Code is very light and it's very useful. So please kindly clarify the explanation you gave on writing CSS separately and attaching it to the HTML. All right. So now, next class, when we start working with HTML and CSS, we are going to be practicing that because the class for tonight is just an introduction to everything we want to cover in this bootcamp. Mm. So how many hours? So the class should last for, I believe, 1 hour, 30 minutes or 2 hours, starting from 7 o'clock every day that we're going to be having a class. Okay, you guys are asking for attendance link. Let me ask the organizer. Mm, attendance link. They will provide the attendance link shortly. All right. So the next class will be sent to everybody's email tomorrow. Yeah, you can run the browser. You can join the class or run your project using any browser on your laptop. Chrome OS also work perfectly. All right. The slide will be provided for every student. Let's be rest assured about that. Okay. Are we learning both front end and back end? Yeah, sure. We're learning both front end and back end. The bootcamp want to cover both the front end and back end, and we have like three facilitators that will walk us through it, including myself. So I'll be focusing more on the back end, while the other facilitator will focus on the front end. Mm, okay. Um, so how many days do we have the class in a week? I believe we are going to be having the class 3 times in a week. So the pronunciation is front end and back end. Front end, front with end, back with end. Okay. So ahead of next class, we can download VS Code. So don't worry, we are going to share the documentation on how to set up the project on our laptop. Mm, all right. Is it possible to use? Okay. Uh, both. These questions. Is web development itself a backend base or front-end base? So web development is the process of building a complete system, like you building the front and the back, and you can also call it as building the front itself. You can decide to build a front-end system, integrating it to a ready-made backend service like Firebase, whereby you don't have to stress yourself writing the backend or configuring the database. You can decide to just focus on doing the front end with yourself. For the authentication, you can use a third-party service like OAuth for your authentication and authorization on the system. And database, you can use Firebase. So, and what you just build, you develop your web yourself, just writing your CSS and JavaScript and React, whereby you plug your system to Firebase. And Firebase can also handle the authentication and authorization for you and can also store your data. Okay, you said does IP and okay, ID and class serve the same purpose? Yeah, ID. So when you well, let's just have an understanding that ID and class is what you use to address or add functionalities to your HTML, your CSS properties to your HTML. But the when you move into your HTML very well, CSS very well, you have an understanding of why you use ID and why you're using the class, because when you're working with trying to configure we're trying to manipulate your DOM, you can start using because there are limits on what JavaScript can do with class and ID. So when you get started with these things, you understand them very well and understand the difference. Okay, somebody asked, can I provide? Okay, attendance link will be shared with everybody soon. And the IDE, I said earlier we should get ourselves prepared for Visual Studio Code. Visual Studio Code is what we are going to be using. Is what I recommend. Visual Code, VS Code. Yeah, is what I recommend. But you can decide to start using Sublime Text or any Visual Studio text editor you're comfortable with. Yeah, Sublime Text, very good. Yeah, Firebase is one of the Google products, a database service that can use like very fast to set up, but it's not free. You have to pay for it. Okay. Mm, okay. Somebody asked a question: is JavaScript both front end and back end? Yeah, you can use JavaScript for front end. You can use it for back end. As a matter of fact, you can also use JavaScript for um, what's it called? Machine learning. All those. But me, I'm not specialized in that. I only specialize in using JavaScript for front end system and back end system. So it, you can also use your JavaScript. JavaScript is very wide. Just let me use that. It's very wide. You can use JavaScript to build mobile app. You can use JavaScript to build desktop app. You can use it to build machine learning. You can use it for AI. A lot of things. There are a lot of libraries. There are a lot of things people have used JavaScript to build. When you start using JavaScript, you start to have more interest on it. Sure, this is a very nice question from someone. Please, can one just focus on being a front-end developer? Sure, you can decide to focus on being a front-end developer, or you can decide to focus on being a back-end developer. So you need to focus, like have your core strengths. Like for the way I build my own system, the person I have, I focus more on backend. So that's why I call myself a backend developer. But I can also do front end. But my core stack is backend. You can wake me up when I'm sleeping and ask me things on backend. I can do anything on backend. But front end, I'm not very proficient on it. But there are people out there that are very proficient in front end and backend. They call themselves a full stack developer. So it's very good. You can set your mind to it. If you have interest in designing, manipulating DOM, writing animation, it's your interest. So it's what you enjoy doing. When I started my programming career, I find it very interesting building logic stuff, writing logic more than focusing on design. That's why I put all my effort and my interest on backend. So is Firebase a general database that can be integrated with frontend? Sure, you can integrate your Firebase into the system. It's a general system. So all you need to do is just go to google.com or Google profile, you can search firebase.com, create an app, your project, and you create a database, you give it the structure the way you want, and it will generate an API for you. So the API is what you integrate into your system. Okay, hope this course is starting from scratch. Yeah, we're definitely starting from scratch for sure. Okay, I think we are moving toward the end of the class for today. All right, somebody said, what is the difference between React JS and Node.js? Like I said, the React JS is from the front end, while Node.js is for the back end. So when we start moving forward in the program, we understand more on it. And I believe by the end of this boot camp, we have all of us, we have different interests. We have people that have interest in JavaScript and the back end using Node, and people that have interest in the front end writing React JS. I'm very confident about that. Everybody will learn very well in the program. I'm assuring everybody that. Okay, I think I'm moving very fast. I'm very sorry for that. Learning the backend and front end, those that make one a full stack. Yeah, if you learn front end and backend and you're very proficient with it, you're a full stack developer. Okay. Mm, okay. All right. I Okay, somebody asked what is the difference between HTTP and HTTPS. So the only difference between the HTTP and HTTPS is the security that HTTPS provide. Like I explained, we have something we call SSL certificates. So you see, the S is the secure, that it's give your server a security. If you set up your server and you don't provide an SSL for it, it's not secure. You need to provide an SSL for the server. So that's what we enable the HTTP or your server to have an HTTPS. And also the SSL certificates expired. So whenever you set up a server, you need to follow up and understand when the SSL will expire to reconfigure it. Um, I believe everybody will catch up very well in our next class, because when we start the class tomorrow, if tomorrow Wednesday, I will have to give us a brief understanding and introduction of what it is again. All right. So we have like 10-15 minutes more to wrap up the program. So did you mention learning that programming language at the beginning? No, I did not mention, or I did not recommend that. That's not the scope of this bootcamp. But if you learn that, it's also fine, because it's one of the Google programming language, and you can use it to build mobile app and also be use it to build web, and it's also cross platform. So how do we download VS Code, Visual Studio Code on our laptop? You can just Google search, download VS Code. Okay. Yeah, we are done for today. I believe we've been answering questions for the past 30 minutes. So let's okay. So thank you very much, and I hope to see everybody in our next class. Bye.